Hi everyone, I'm Scott Schneider. This is Stereo Niche. This week we're going to take a look at ads from 1980. All right, so this week we're going to take a look at ads from 1980. Now, 1980, the very first year of the 80s, and already things are changing. A lot of the manufacturers had already transitioned away from, I'll say, those classic 70s silverface era designs and had moved into what we sort of, see and recognize as 80s style. Some other manufacturers, there's only one actually, I think it was Toshiba, had still, their designs were still very 70s looking. And Sansui was sort of playing both sides of the fence. They had their older G line from the 70s, but they also had their Z line starting in the 80s, and they had quite a different look. So they were covering sort of both sides, if you will, and offering it to the consumer. So I've also got some other advertisements from some non-audio companies just to show what was going on. It's very typical of the 80s and what was popular. So hope you enjoy it, and I'll talk to you at the end. Well, kicking us off for the 1980s, it's an ad for cartridges from ADC. This is the Integra, kind of appropriate. We'll see quite a few ads for cartridges. This is just prior to the CD, of course, by a couple of years. So phonos were, heavily advertised. Moving on to the right here, ADC also had some mini speakers, which I never recall. These look pretty good. Would really like to find a set of these. If anyone ever has heard these, put some comments in the, for this video and let us know what you think. Now here's the Advent 5002. If you like the best in loudspeakers, but doubt you can afford them, please read this ad. I would have thought there would have been a lot of advertising actually for the Advent lines, but this is the only one I could find. Here we go is another cartridge from Adcom, the Cross Coil. Is this the best cartridge in the world? I don't know. Now here's ADS. Huge fans for ADS. They were a few years, 3 or 4 years into their products here in the US. And here's a couple of ads for them. Transform your home into a nightclub, concert hall, or a cathedral. And there's one on the right here. They show the cool stands that are pretty hard to find. I've got some 810s that I've got the stands for. And it's quite unique, really sets them apart. Now here's Iowa, or Awa. I remember them distinctly as a company that made these sort of mini systems. They were sort of, as I can recall, one of the first companies to sort of target that market. They still made full-size components as well. Here's on the left, we can see this cassette deck, full-size cassette deck, the ADM 800U. And in the middle here, here's the mini components, the Iowa M501. It's full performance with studio sound. And on the right here, some more examples of their mini systems. Our little goes a long way. Here's some Akai. Akai made some cool stuff here and there. I really like some of their cassette decks in particular, but they made some nice receivers. I do not have any. I would like to find a good example, but this cassette deck on the left is pretty nice looking. Invest in metal. And in the middle here, improve your station in life. Akai's new receiver line. More power, better specs, new styling. And then here on the right, of course, you have to have a turntable in the mix. Here's Akai again, promoting their cassette deck here and the Superior GX heads. And they made some really very nice reel-to-reels over the years as well. Here's the Akai introduces the new wave. Here we go again. Lots of Akai. They were heavily marketing at this time frame. Quick reverse for people who hate to interrupt a great performance. And here's some more mini components for people with more taste than space. Allison. Unfortunately, I've yet to acquire some Allisons. I had a line on some about 11, 12 years ago, and unfortunately missed them, but here's the Allison 3. Allison always sort of had the left edge of a page for their ads, about a quarter page advertisements. But here's the 3 on the left, and they've got the Allison 6s here, and the Le Cube. I'd really like to hear some Allisons sometime. I've heard only really good things about them. All right, here, can you find our new subwoofer in this picture from Altec, built right into the table? Then how audio history is made. Look at that, looks like the Model 19, I think. That's a pretty nice depiction. And then of course on the right, a lot of companies, probably majority of the big audio companies were making gear for cars as well. A lot of movement into that car mobile vehicle category. If you don't have at least $1,000 to spend on an AudioVox high comp outside system, then read no further. AudioVox, the bargain brand, I guess. And of course, cassette decks, all the rage. Everyone was using cassette decks in this time frame, so a lot of advertisement there. This one from Ampex. State of the art. Some AR advertising there. It's kind of a unique advertising bit they've got on the left there. On the right here, a little more traditional. Why pay for frills if what you really want is performance? Well, here's B&O. Very distinctive. B&O, very popular, and I think probably gaining some popularity around this time frame. Prior to this, the only time I actually saw their advertising was for their tone arms and their cartridges. So it seems like that's how they started, then moved into other categories. But I've not owned this particular table, but it seems to be fairly well regarded. And then of course they're advertising their cartridges in the other 2 ads here. Put SoundGuard on trial. Take up to 30 days to try SoundGuard on your records. Get your money back if you're not fully satisfied. Well, along with, needles and cartridges and things, you've got to have something to clean off your albums and records. So, they're popularized their products for just, doing that and making your records sound better. Here's a few different ads. Here's Braun. Now, Braun, I think most of us tend to think of ADS because that's where ADS started, by importing Braun. But Braun was still marketing some speakers here under their own brand. Here in the middle, Blaupunkt. At this particular time frame, I was in high school, and Blaupunkt, I was just starting to, hear the name, and it sort of took off from what I remember. If you had a Blaupunkt, you had a really cool system in your car. And here's BIC. I've never seen these speakers, but they look rather ohm-ish, and not really heard much about them. If anyone knows anything about them, put some comments in the fields below. Well, here's a name that is either love it or hate it. Bose. A lot of criticism for Bose. I've not ever very much preferred them myself. Although I will say the set on the left here, the 501s, when I was in college, was one of the first sort of nice systems I heard. A friend of mine had a set, and they rocked. They really did, from what I remember. Now, it wasn't critical listening. We were just rocking out. But as far as I remember, they were pretty good. They cranked pretty well. Later, about a few years after I graduated college, I did run into a fellow that had a set of 901s. And they had a bit of stature to them at the time. I have a few sets, and I've tried them over the years. Just, not my cup of tea, but Bose was very much advertising in 1980, and they were sort of hitting their stride. Here's another ad for them, showing all of the material that goes into the 901. Having refoamed a pair or 2 of them, I can tell you that's not an exaggeration. There's a lot of parts there, and it takes quite a bit of time to go through all those drivers for refoaming them. It's quite a bit of effort, but in any case, they were showing you how much was going into them. Here's the Bose 550 receiver. I had one of these some years ago. They have a cool touch sensitive knobs on the, I think it was the tuner knob. If you touched it, it turned it on and off, and that was, you know, pretty cool. This also had a, if I remember right, a built-in EQ. So if you had this, you didn't need the separate external EQ for the speakers. And so that was kind of a cool thing. Here we are with BSR. Not had much BSR over the years. Not typically the ones I've run across were fairly low end. I've never seen these before, this Pro 3 series. Single play versus multi-play. The argument is over. And here's the AccuGlide with a remote of some sort. And then you'll be impressed with our connections. So BSR, doing some advertising. Here's several different companies, but here's Clarion. Clarion, another, as I recall, fairly big car audio manufacturer. And not, you know, I don't recall them as being as big as, say, Blaupunkt or Alpine or something, but I do remember them as being a pretty solid brand. Then we've got Crown. Crown, gosh, I've seen that EQ quite a number of times. Probably one of the best EQs made, I think. They seem to have been quite popular. On the right here, the best kept secret in loudspeakers from Celestion. Now here's Carver. Carver, I think just sort of, you know, kind of still coming out the 70s and just building some momentum here, but here's some of their stuff. They're, I think this is the second iteration of that amp. Carver Sonic Holography. I think they were probably one of the best at coming up with some new marketing names. And then Bob Carver's got it. There he is, dancing away with his little cube. I think that's that little cube amp that they had. Now, one of the things in the magazines I've seen is they have some interesting humor, and there were also oftentimes some little cartoons in there. So I saw these while I was going through looking for some ads, and I thought these would be kind of humorous. Not sure if you can read these or not, and I'll let you go through them. You can hit pause and take a look, but there's some, you know, pretty funny ones in here, kind of like the one on the top right. You know, I need those signs to make sure no one touches my system, kind of thing. Here's DBX. DBX, very popular at the time and still seems to be. I have one of these that I sold recently, one of these units here for dynamic range, and I had quite a few people interested in it, so it seems to be fairly popular still. On the right, again, back to maintaining your records. Who remembers the Zero Stat? Who didn't take the Zero Stat and shoot your arm with it once, at least once? But I've got one of these kits. I think they're cool. They just look, you know, pretty awesome, I think, sitting up there next to your turntable. And here's Dahlquist DQ10, very legendary speaker. And, you know, I've got a set. Unfortunately, they were modified, and I need to unmodify them. But very well regarded speaker. I would say quite legendary. Here's Denon. On the left, very, very cool turntable. This is the DP60L. I have the 62L. Fantastic tables. Here in the middle, they were moving into other categories. And here's a cassette deck. And then their cartridge. This is the DL300, but they made some fantastic cartridges over the years. And here's Dual. I only think of Dual, tend to think of them only as a turntable manufacturer, but they did move into other categories. Ironically, I had that cassette deck and didn't find it to be, all that stellar, so I ended up giving it away. But ironically, I kept the box for another unit that I have that it actually fits. So that's interesting that I had that particular cassette deck, because I don't think I've ever run across it again. And of course, here are some units from their turntables, which they are very famous for. Most of them are their dual, their idler drives, I think we mostly tend to think about, but they moved into more slimmer offerings later. EPI LS81, no other compact delivers this kind of performance. On the right here, look at those things. Those things look like they can certainly rock. A speaker for those who feel that loud is very much a part of live. And they look like they could crank out some tunes, the EPI 500. Well, here's the ESS Heal or Heil. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce it, but I've yet to own a pair of these and would love to. I've not really ever run across them, to be honest. Would be a set I would love to have. I've only heard good things about them. On the right, not a company that I'd really ever heard of until very recently. And I saw a set for sale. Unfortunately, I couldn't get up there to get them. They were, a bit far away. But I think it's UMIG. But from what I understand, they have a interesting history, and they didn't last very long. But they were trying to get into the market, and they had some, looked like some competitive offerings for a few years before they sort of got out of the market. It was a German company, from what I understood. And here's Empire, back to advertising some cartridges again. Empire was right in the mix there with, Stanton and some others. And here is the Electro Voice. Electro Voice, by this time frame, not advertising a lot, right? Early 60s, 50s and 60s, they were everywhere, all over the magazines, advertising like crazy. But by 1980, they had reduced their advertising and models quite as the market had changed, and they didn't continue to grow along with it. But this is the Interface C. Here's Fisher. Fisher continuing on. This is their turntable. Looks like it's a remote. That'd be kind of interesting. But so they were still marketing pretty heavily. Here's the Fisher on the left with their cassette deck that they were offering at the time. In the middle here, it's Fuji. If you have a cassette deck, you got to have some cassettes to go with it. So Fuji, I remember them quite a bit. I had not a lot of their cassettes over the years, but I did have some. I think I had TDK most often, but Fuji was out there. And not audio, but it was in the audio mags back around 1980. If we were driving, just about all of us, I think, had some kind of radar detector. So Fox was one of them. So they're advertising here. I don't go anywhere without my Fox. Now again, not quite audio, but I think we all, if we're old enough, all of us had some kind of digital clock, and it was just a the other thing that you listened to most often, probably right after your stereo, was our clock radios. And I just remember them being, one of the things that all of us sought out for some period of time. It did all these functions, you could probably put 10 alarms on there when we only needed one. But the digital clock, and it was a big deal for us, and there's a big advertisement here from GE. And here's Hitachi. Hitachi was good manufacturer of the day. They were putting out some good product, although not nearly as popular as other brands, but the price of power just went down. And here we are in the middle with the brain. Hitachi puts it in charge of sensitivity, bias, and EQ. The ATRS, Automatic Tape Response System. And on the right here, the world's most powerful 35-watt receiver, the Class G. Unfortunately, I don't have any Hitachi gear. I just still need to find an example or two. Harman Kardon had some distinctive stuff of this time frame. It had gone into quite a different, I think, look. Trying to be sleek looking. It was pretty unique. I've had a couple of pieces years ago, but unfortunately I moved them on before I moved and didn't hang on to them. But so now everyone can afford to be an audiophile. And then here's how to make a standard $5 tape outperform a $10 metal tape. So things were pretty expensive. $10 for a metal tape would have been a lot of money back then. And then here's on the right. Now there are two approaches to low THD. Ours gives you better sound, of course. Now, I don't know what this thing is, but it was in the advertisements. But I thought anything called a honey box, I have to point that out. Hear what you've been missing. Listen with a honeybox omnisonic imager, a quantum leap forward in stereo reproduction. Yeah, I didn't go through all the details here, but just the name alone was enough to give it a mention here. Well, here's Infinity. Infinity, of course, made some quite incredible speakers. And here's the reference standard 4.5. Haven't owned this particular set. I've owned some Quantums over the years. Haven't owned too many Infinities, but There's the reference center 4.5 in the middle, some pretty big towers. Let's see, what are those things? They're about $28,000 according to that, or 20. Can't quite see the fine print. And then on the right here, this is the RSA. Seen quite a few of those. Here's JBL, the L112. JBL was marketing at the time, but it was sort of interesting, more subtle. They had a lot more white space than most others, but they were out there. Here's the JBL new L150. Its bottom puts it on top. Okay. Jensen. Now during this time, Jensen, this is how I knew them. Jensen was the car manufacturer of, if you had a set of Jensen speakers, you had the speakers. That was just the way it was. In my high school, at least, Jensen just ruled the day. And the Jensen car audio was pretty good, but I just remember everyone having a Pioneer Super Tuner. That was the thing. But man, if you paired those, Pioneer Super Tuner with some Jensen triacs, man, you had the system. Here's JVC and the game here. They got a cassette deck. Now more people can afford JVC cassette deck technology. On the right, this is when you bought it. Cassettes cost $1, and noise reduction meant turning it down. Now you're ready for JVC's new metal compatible decks. All right. Here's the Super A. I remember Super A. Later in the 80s, they were still manufacturing models with Super A. And after stunning the audio world by going beyond Class A, it's the Super A. We stunned the competition with the Super A receiver, the RS33. Here's the missing link in stereo from COS. All right, the K4DS. It's the digital delay system. It turns your room into a cabaret, a theater, an auditorium, or a concert hall. I guess this was the very early stages of home theater. On the sound of COS will spoil you for anything else. Yeah, I remember COS seemed to have pretty big market share for the headphones, at least. Here's KEF, or KEF, the reference model 105 Series 2. I've not owned this particular model, but I'd certainly love to find a set of these. I think they're pretty cool. Here on the right, elegant, efficient, and effective. The model 304. I've never seen that model. That's kind of interesting. Here's KLH. KLH still out there. How to get an honest 30 hertz from a 1.25 cubic foot speaker system. It's the KLH computer controlled loudspeakers. That's the only way you get it. Well, here's Kenwood. Kenwood, coming out of the 70s, things looking quite different. That cassette deck on the left looks pretty serious, the KX2060. And here's the turntable offering, the KD3100, quite different from that man-made, rock material that they had before. On the right, that's a pretty 80s looking receiver there, quite different from their earlier models, the 11 and those other offerings that they had. So right out of the gate, 1980, things had changed. Well, here's Klipsch, the Klipschorn, the finest loudspeaker system in the world, is a lifetime experience. On the right here is the biggest sound in a small speaker, is 2/3 the Klipschorn at less than half the price. All right. Well, here's some receivers and gear from Lux Audio. Now, I say that with a little bit of emphasis because someone's going to point out that it was Lux Audio that distributed Luxman gear. So although everything here says Lux, on the actual receiver and gear it says Luxman. So not going to get into all that, but Luxman had some cool stuff. Just like today, they were a premium manufacturer back then and had some cool gear. Lux delivers tuner amps with a new twist, the Duo Beta and intelligent tuning. So here's Macintosh, pretty typical for this time frame. Throughout the 60s and 70s, this was about the extent of the advertising they did. I can't imagine they sold that many units, but based on their advertising anyway. But this was about the extent of it, nothing flashy at all. They typically had one of these, send today, this clip out this little form, and then send it to us and we'll send you a catalog type of thing. And that was Macintosh. Here's Mitsubishi. They were trying to break into the market around this time frame. They had some really cool offerings. This is the speakers they were offering at the time. Stop listening to paper. So I guess they were highlighting their better materials here. Now on the left here, this is one of the cool receivers that they had. They had this interesting dial tuner, and it's quite interesting stuff. I think it was some cool gear, especially on the right here, this vertical turntable. I almost had one of these about 12 years ago, and a guy, sold it out from under me, and we made a deal, and went to go get it, and he was like, "Oh no, I already sold it." But anyway, I've never run across another one. I remember when these were advertised back then. There was some show I would watch, and they showcased one of these on the show. It was a variety show of some sort, and they had one of these on there. Coolest thing I can remember seeing at that time frame. I thought, wow, that's pretty crazy. So here's the rack system, the Ritzy Mitsubishi, and they had it displayed like a lot of manufacturers of this time frame. They started putting out rack systems. Now here's Magnaplaner. Magnaplaner, again, similar to Macintosh, didn't have a lot of advertising, not in the much, at least in the areas I was looking. And this is the only ad I saw for the entire year. Over on the right, the pretty iconic Maxell ad, and I think we all recognize that pretty well. In fact, probably a lot of us have have a poster with that on it. So here's MCS. MCS was the in-house brand of JCPenney. And they were out there advertising in the magazines. I remember they had a very big audio electronics section in their stores back then. And the MCS brand was something that they had made and was quite prolific. There's quite a bit of MCS gear out there. Some of it's pretty good. Here we go on the left, cartridges again. The Microacoustics cartridge. They had some pretty nice cartridges, if I recall. Micron, they had a pretty good series of speakers. I think I had a set years ago, but they made some really cool small speakers in 3 ways, that kind of thing. And on the right, Mordaunt Short. I think this was a French company, I believe. They have some cool stuff. I had a set, a small set years ago before I relocated, and they're pretty nice speakers. Well, here it is, Nakamichi. If you're at all into cassettes, you certainly know Nakamichi. On the left is the exquisite, I'll say, 1000 ZXL. This was the extreme top of the line model back then. Then they had some just about everything from Nakamichi was very good, but here's in the middle here, for those who take recording seriously, the 580 series. And then on the right, I've got several models of this, but it's the, I guess, 600 series. Very nice units, all of them. Here's Nico. Nico was a very good manufacturer. It's one of the brands I consider sort of under the radar, not well known because they just weren't that popular. But Nico's made some cool stuff. This looks like a sort of a rack mount set of components here. Here's another one of those cartridges, Ortofon. Ortofon had some really cool cartridges. It was they were very distinctive. In a way, they reminded me of the B&O models, some of the B&O models. And on the right, Ohm's Law 9. It is possible to make a loudspeaker that gets loud and still sounds good. I had a set of those, by the way. Those were some very nice speakers. As I recall, I think they were rated up to like 1,000 watts or something. Crazy, something crazy off the charts, but really cool speaker. And here's the secret of Onkyo. They had some interesting 80s time frame advertising. A lot of cool stuff here in the middle, but it was on the right here is what I wanted to sort of talk about. That their receivers, still in 1980, were looking like 1970s speakers. receivers, and so I think they're really cool. I think they hung on to the market. Now, whether at that time frame that was good for them or bad, I don't know. But at least probably in the vintage side of things now, I would think probably most of those units are more collectible than others from other manufacturers that changed, like Harman Kardon, for example. Here's more Onkyo. Now these, this one on the left anyway, moving more so into an 80s look, getting a little more lean looking, but more distinctive. Still, I think it still shows it has a foot in the 70s still, along with the cassette on the right. Well, here's the big guy, the big dog, Pioneer. Pioneer's tape, they're real here. This RT909, and then on the right, the 1250. Stellar gear. Nothing can be said about it that probably hasn't already been said, but these are some crazy great components here that really stand out. They have that Fluoroscan meters and things that just make them stand out. It just looks like they put everything in the kitchen sink into these components. There's a little more elegant features on these Pioneer models here. TX 9800 tuner, very cool. Kind of a, I think, classic. Again, these sort of, to me anyway, they didn't forget the 70s. It was more of a, a transitional design rather than just sort of a, completely change everything and, make it look different. Still looks, very pioneerish, If all $200 turntables had the same specs, how come the PL400 sounds better? I don't know, but it's a pretty cool ad. Now here's the laser disc. I never had a laser disc, but I have one now. I actually have a Pioneer laser disc. I've never tried it because I have no media, but pretty cool. It was an interesting time frame. This, the laser disc, if you've never seen one, they look like a humongous CD. And these were the thing right out of the gate for playing, movies and things. Although you would think it held several movies on something that size, they couldn't pack that much data on them. And as I recall, I think you still had to flip the disc over to see the other side of the movie. But very cool. This was certainly a moment in the evolution of our technology. Well, here's the Pioneer HPM line. I think just about anyone who's into vintage audio is familiar with at least some of these. This is probably the HPM 100 probably gets more vintage discussion than anything else, but the 40, the 60, and the 150 are, all well regarded. Now here's the non-switching receivers with quartz lock tuning that drastically reduce distortion and give you higher fidelity. Here's the 3800 and the 3900. And here's Polk Audio. Polk Audio, these ads look a little bit dated, but they were still gaining traction. Great speakers from this time frame. I think they were still sort of building momentum into the 80s. This was 1980, of course, and as they kept going, I think they just continued to build market share. Philips had some cool stuff. They cranked out some gear. Here's their cassette deck on the left. And in the middle, it looks like there were several models here, and it looks like a very similar to a Technics line that came out. These little rack mount, sort of thinner components, and that turntable looks really nice. But Philips, they made some good stuff. Speakers are not pure speakers when they're linear, from phase linear. So this is phase linear ads here. They're fairly prolific. They're doing quite a bit of advertising in this time frame. I think they were probably in the middle of their stride here, but they've got some cool products. We mostly think about their amps, I think is pretty much what we think about mostly, but they did have some speakers. I've never run across any. They obviously had a turntable here and a cassette deck. And here's Polaroid SX70 sonar. I only put this in here because it was something cool from that time frame. If we were making instant pictures, everybody had a Polaroid back then, didn't want to wait and get your film developed, get it on a Polaroid. And, maybe some of us are, still scarred like me when we found our parents', private pictures. But, Yeah, the Polaroid was the thing. It was actually very cool how it would collapse down into a, like a flat pack and then, spring open for taking pictures. It was a pretty cool camera. Here's the Pickering XSB 4000 cartridge. Again, cartridges, lots of advertising cartridges. It was, pretty key component for some great sound. On the right here, I would love to find a set of these from RTR. I mean, look at that thing. That's just cool. Popped our ears, rattled objects in the room, and were almost as palpable as audible. I mean, that thing, I can't imagine how hard it would be to move it, but, pretty cool. And here's Radio Shack, the Minimus 7. Quite iconic, $49.95 for a pair of those. In the middle here, it's one of their reel-to-reels. I think I have one of these, actually. And the right, it's a breakthrough. It's a word that Realistic uses very, very, very rarely, but nothing else describes the STA 2200. There's Reeboks. Reeboks, you always know Reeboks. I mean, look at that. Every one of those, you can tell it kind of has a similar style. The knobs are shared amongst everything, and I don't think they dramatically changed their style across a couple of decades, but Reeboks made some great stuff. Mostly what I'm familiar with is the Reeboks B77, the reel-to-reel. But I'd love to find, some of this other gear here. I think it'd be pretty cool. Here is Sansui. They were quite a prolific marketer of this time frame. I just recently talked about the 719 here, which is on the left. It's a stellar integrated. In the middle, this is the G line of the time. This is the X700 series, but this is the 4700. And then on the right, this is a rack system, which is, again, becoming popular, starting to really gain traction, at this time frame. Moving on, more Sansui, the realization of great expectations, the Z series. So, moving and evolving, getting a little more digital oriented after, the G line. And then on the right here, it is the Sansui Super Feed Forward System, the end of distortion, the Super FF. Here's a bigger ads of the G series. These were overlapping with the other lines, but really cool ads showing you the bigger models above the 4700. But I had it's what started me in vintage audio was my G9700 actually, and very cool unit. I wish I still had it. Now here's Sanyo. Sanyo had their own lines. I had a Sanyo car stereo one time, and it was okay. I can't say that it was. I considered it, sort of premium, but it was okay. This is I'd like to. I don't have any Sansui receivers. I'd like to find some of the home audio gear. I don't have any good units I could reference. Here's Scott. Scott was still putting out some stuff. Don't have a good Scott unit at this time frame either. Most of my pieces are more from the tube era, but Scott was putting out some gear at that time frame. If you can find a receiver that does more, you better buy it. Now here's Sony synthesized art. Sony's new receiver creates HiFi with a computerized tuner, a DC power amp, and a pulse power supply. Here's more from Sony. Crystal clear reasons for receiver size separates. And on the right here, some cassette decks. More synthesized art. Year of the bioelectronic tone arm. Let's see, what is that model? That's the PSX75. Looks pretty cool. Here we go with some cartridges again, this time from Stanton, the 681 EE. Pretty cool cartridge. I've got a couple of those. I think they're pretty stellar, and sure had quite a few models of V15 Type 4. Ultra high fidelity from Saba. Never had any Saba. I think it was something that didn't sell hardly any, much volume here. Not sure if they were where they were from exactly. If they were German or somewhere else, I'm not sure. But I've only seen it a few times. Mostly older stuff, not from 1980 time frame. Well, Sparkomatic, they were probably one of the most prolific car audio marketers, and I saw their displays in just about every location. I don't think they considered, it didn't matter where they sold their gear. I think I saw Sparkomatic stuff in every discount chain, every department store. They covered pretty much every geography, every retail category. So they were quite prolific. I never owned any, but I don't know that it was, poor gear. I'm not really sure. Here's some SAE. I've got some SAE units. SAE, really cool stuff. A lot of diehard SAE collectors out there. I think they made some really cool gear, and looks pretty serious. Some of this T14 tuner and the A14 amplifier. In the middle here, at last an amplifier that listens to loudspeakers. Wow, looks pretty serious. And then they've got this stack. Tomorrow is here early. Yeah, pretty cool. TDK. TDK was one of the cassette manufacturers that I use very often. I think the vast majority of my cassettes were probably TDK. That or maybe Memorex, but no, I tend to call TDK most of the time. It's probably because they were on sale. I don't know. I didn't have much money, so I'm sure that's one of the reasons. Here's TEAC. My first actual system when I went to college, which wasn't until '83 though. My first cassette deck was a TEAC, but TEAC was well known in the tape media category. They made some stellar reel-to-reels, and then moved on in cassette decks as well. All right, here is the Technics. Technics, I think most of us tend to first think about Technics because they were so prolific in their turntables and were very good at them. They made some fantastic direct drives. Here's an example of one of them. But they also made some other things. Of course, this is another turntable on the left side here. I think it's the SL10 maybe, but on the right, they were making components. We're familiar with the earlier SA1000, SA800, etc. But in the 80s, they were changing their styles as well. Of course, this is looks like a nice integrated amp and tuner. Here we are with another ad for some turntables. And here's a cassette deck. How to tape your records as accurately as Technics direct drive turntables play them. So, they're trying to build on the success of their turntables. Well, here's Toshiba. Can't say I've ever seen this particular model. This is pretty cool. Don't believe every digital readout you read. To build a better receiver, we left out a few unnecessary parts. Okay. Guess talking about that tuner dial they've got there at the bottom. That's quite cool. I've never seen that model in my collecting over the years. Vector Research. Vector Research kind of reminds me of SAE in a way. Everyone I've run across very much likes them. They seem to have some really good gear for the time frame that they were out there. But look at that. That's pretty cool stuff. And here's Yamaha. Yamaha's still got the sort of classic look going here on the left with their big receivers. Some awesome turntables. This PX2, quite cool. That linear drive, and wish I would had one of those in my collection. And here's the Yamaha speakers, of course. Looks like the NS1000. And Zenith. Zenith audio components, specs, and more specs. Well, can't say that we remember those, but Zenith was out there trying to make, get some market share. I guess they were trying to expand on their TV brand, but, they had some components out there for a while. Here at the end, I found these couple of interesting pictures. On the left, how do we build, go through all the effort of building our systems and things and putting these things all together with the racks and the speakers and, all of that. A lot of busy guys there, little guys helping to put all that stuff together. And on the right, we don't want anybody messing with our system. And yet here comes some, Neanderthal coming in, messing around with our records and putting his fingers all over them, and kids playing around everything, kind of a funny caricature of the audiophile, I guess. All right, well, I know it's been a long video, but I think there was a whole lot of cool stuff to see there. And you got to see the transition from the 70s to the 80s for a lot of companies. A lot of them had already started a little bit prior to 1980, but 1980 certainly, the majority of them, I think, were a little more sort of 80s style than 70s style. Clearly, Sansui and Pioneer were still had their foot, and Yamaha still had their foot into the 70s. They didn't make a dramatic change like Harman Kardon and some others. Of course, Harman Kardon was always a little bit different anyway, but there were some other companies that sort of leapt out there and took a big gamble. Whether it was a big gamble or not, and in hindsight, I don't know. Without access to sales numbers and things, it's impossible to say. But quite a big difference in some of those approaches. And then you see companies like SAE and Vector, come into play. So pretty cool. And then we saw some laughing, some cartoons there that were sort of laughable, on point for audio enthusiasts. I thought those were kind of funny. And then the artwork at the end, I had never seen that before, but an interesting perspective on what we audiophiles and audio enthusiasts go through and what we think about putting our systems together, and who's going to touch them and mess around with our gear. Anyway, I know it's a long video. Thank you guys for hanging out and watching all of that. Hope you found it entertaining. If you don't want to miss that next video, hit that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up while you're there, and we'll see you next time.